So then does the death of Alexei Navalny strike you as a bit of a outburst of paranoia then?
You could definitely make that claim. I think that would be. I think there's definitely evidence for it. I think that Navalny obviously was a very significant person inside of Russia. I think his campaigns, against the actions of Putin's government, obviously ended up in him being assassinated. But I think his death definitely sort of was an example of Putin's paranoia, in that he was obviously afraid of what could happen if that person was allowed to carry on speaking, especially with the Ukraine war and how that's gone in recent years.
Do you think the Ukraine war as well is another outreach of that, almost a part of that paranoia, but in a way that it's some form of meeting up to almost a Stalinist, not in ideology per se, but in terms of that Russian aggressive ideology in foreign policy?
I think that's a great point of not saying that he's Stalinist. I think it's such an easy trap to fall into, of saying that Putin wants to be Stalin, but I don't think that's true. I think, if anything, he wants to be a great Russian leader, and maybe if that fits him into a similar circle as Joseph Stalin, then so be it. But I think, like you said, I think it fits more in to this idea of Russian expansionist rhetoric that he more taps into. I mean, when you listen to when he had that interview with Tucker Carlson where he just spoke for hours about Russian history. If anything, that gave us a great indication of that, of showing us that it wasn't just talking about how great Stalin was. It was about the fact that in Russian history, this is the area that we've had. It's almost as if he wants to achieve that again. He wants to be, in a way, rather than a great Soviet leader, he wants to be a great Russian Tsar again. It's almost like he wants to go back to those years.
So do you think that the propaganda in terms of on horseback with the Russian forestry and landscape, as well as living in palaces, which was exposed by Navalny in some of his YouTube content, do you think they are visual cues of where this man's personal ideology lies?
I think so. I think that it definitely. I think it would be unfair to him to call him a Soviet, or as if fit him more into the Soviet ideology. I think he definitely fits more into this sort of Tsarist Russian ideology instead, in that yes, he propagates this image of being the great man in the similar way to the Tsars did. He pushes the strength of the Russian Orthodox Church, and obviously people who are willing to question that are seen as a threat and dispatched. So I think it's very clear to see that he would, maybe not that he would like to be, but I think he's definitely, with his actions, should be put more towards the Tsars in a way than the Soviet leaders in terms of his actions.
So therefore, do you think he would be more comparable, let's say, to a more unfamiliar figure for most people of Russian history, which were Alexander Kolchak?
Yeah, I think that's definitely someone who he could be aligned with. Obviously, Kolchak was very much a military man. He was very much had less of an interest in the politics. I know that he's someone that you know a lot about and could probably speak about better than I could. He's definitely someone who was more interested in politics, I think, than any. Well, he was not interested in the politics and more interested in this sort of military style of action, which definitely could have linked him with Putin. I mean, what would you say in terms of the way that Putin is and the way that Kolchak was? Do you see the comparisons there? Is that something that you?
I honestly don't. I say it on the basis of personality, because Kolchak, for me, has always been a very, very cold and withdrawn character. So politics and foreplay in terms of dealing with people on a diplomatic or personal level is very difficult for him. You can see it in the sources. You can see people describe. I think it's General Graves, who was part of the American expedition, described him as very, very, very distant or absent. Can't remember the word he used, but very, very absent character. But still, with that, I don't think that he realised that politics was almost like a benchmark. I don't think he completely realised that politics was a benchmark for securing one's own power rather than just a military side, which he was accustomed to. I think Putin knows these as both as tenets and both interdependent and can't survive without another.
So would you say that maybe that Putin is making up for the weaknesses that Kolchak, well, maybe not weaknesses, but is he someone who, that when Kolchak couldn't face up to the sort of the political side of being a leader, that Putin can? Is that something that you believe with or agree with? Sorry.
Well, probably. I think Putin would rather we forget Kolchak. It's a common thing that you see about the Admiral's legacy, Admiral Kolchak's legacy in Russia. It's quite very ignominious, very buried under the carpet. You know, he's historically conservative figure, was destroyed in reputation by the Soviet Union and a lot of their historians, as well as, you know, culturally. You know, I think the fact he doesn't have an unmarked grave, yeah, it happened at the time, and they did shoot him and his adjutant and push them into a gap in an icy cold river, and the bodies were never seen again. But places where have been commemorated in his honour, if you want to call it that, have been desecrated consistently by a numerous number of political factions in Russia. So I think that we drawing this comparison here, or I drawing this comparison here, is very, very not in line with the kind of conservative, you know, body ideology that Putin wants to push himself.
Right.
If you really enjoyed that, there's some more content down here. But don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.